I never thought I'd be the guy crouched in the back seat of his own car, heart pounding, hands shaking, waiting for his wife to come out of another man's house. But there I was, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, watching the front door of some sleek, modern townhouse in a part of the city we never even visited. The car's clock glowed 12:47 a.m., and the street was silent except for the occasional passing car. My stomach twisted in knots, the kind of feeling you get when you already know the answer, but you just need to see it for yourself. Lisa had told me she was out with the girls tonight. A harmless dinner, some drinks, the usual. She even kissed me on the cheek before she left, smiled that same smile she'd given me for years, like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. It wasn't just the late nights or the distant look in her eyes lately. It was the way she suddenly cared about her appearance more than usual, the way she giggled at her phone like a damn teenager, the way she always had some vague excuse when I asked her where she'd been. And the worst part? I didn't want to believe it. I had spent weeks pushing the thoughts away, convincing myself I was being paranoid, that I was just overthinking things. But when I saw a message pop up on her phone this afternoon, just one line, "Can't wait to see you tonight," something inside me snapped. She had locked her phone, of course, but she wasn't fast enough to stop me from seeing that. The sender's name was just the letter J, no last name, no details, just an initial and a heart emoji. That was enough. I didn't ask her about it, didn't explode in anger or demand answers. Instead, I waited. I watched. And when she left the house tonight, I followed her. I had expected to end up at a bar or maybe some fancy restaurant downtown, somewhere her friends would be. But instead, I tailed her through back roads and unfamiliar streets until she pulled up to this place. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just parked, got out, and walked straight inside like she'd done it 100 times before. No knocking, no waiting, just walked in like she belonged there. Now I sat in the dark, gripping my phone, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. My pulse was so loud in my ears that I almost didn't hear the door opening. My breath caught as I saw her step out, her silhouette framed by the porch light. Her hair was slightly messy, her lipstick smudged, her blouse untucked. But the real kicker? She wasn't alone. A man, tall, confident, wearing nothing but sweatpants and a smug fucking grin, leaned against the doorway. He said something to her, something quiet, and she laughed. She laughed. Not just any laugh, but that soft, intimate kind of laugh she used to give me when we were first dating. Then, just to drive the knife in deeper, she reached up and touched his face, fingers grazing his jaw before turning and walking to her car. He stood there, watching her leave, not even trying to hide the fact that he had just spent the night with another man's wife. I gritted my teeth so hard I thought they'd crack. Every part of me screamed to get out of the car, to storm up there and knock that grin right off his face. But instead, I stayed frozen, watching as Lisa drove away, completely unaware that her husband had just witnessed the truth. I let out a slow breath, staring at the house, at the man still standing in the doorway, and made a decision. This wasn't going to end with me sitting in a car, crying like some heartbroken fool. No, this was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark corner of the living room, my fists clenched, my mind racing through every single interaction Lisa and I had in the past few months, trying to pinpoint exactly when my marriage had turned into this mess. Every look she had given me, every excuse she had made, every moment of distance, it all started making sense now, piecing together into a timeline of deception that I had been too blind to see. I wanted to wake her up, to drag her out of bed and force her to admit it, to explain how she could look me in the eyes every day and lie to my face without even flinching. But instead, I waited. I needed to hear her say it. I needed her to destroy the last shred of doubt with her own words. When she finally walked into the kitchen in the morning, still wearing the same soft smile she had always used on me, I could feel my stomach turn. The sight of her standing there, brewing coffee like she hadn't spent last night with another man, made me sick. I watched as she hummed quietly to herself, completely unaware that everything had already changed. "Morning," she said casually, pouring her coffee and leaning against the counter like it was just another normal day. "Did you sleep okay?" I stayed seated at the table, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, my voice even when I finally spoke. "Where were you last night?" She barely hesitated. "I told you, I was out with the girls." "Why?" I stared at her, waiting for something, anything, that would show even the slightest sign of guilt. But there was nothing. She took a sip of her coffee, looking at me with mild curiosity, like she didn't even realize that she was being interrogated. "You went to his house," I said, my voice colder this time. "I saw you." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. It wasn't shock. It wasn't guilt. It was annoyance, like I had just inconvenienced her with something trivial. She placed the cup down, let out a slow breath, and then finally met my eyes. "Adam," she said, her tone controlled, her posture still relaxed. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I was with my friends." I felt something snap inside me. "Cut the shit, Lisa. I followed you. I watched you walk into his house like you've done it 1,000 times. I saw you come out with your hair a mess and your shirt untucked. Don't insult me by pretending I'm imagining things." She sighed, rubbing her temple as if she was the one who had to deal with something exhausting. Then, finally, she dropped the act. "Okay. Fine. You saw me. So what now?" That was it. No panic, no desperate lies, no attempt to deny it anymore. Just those 3 words, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience for her. My jaw tightened, my hands clenched under the table, and I forced myself to stay seated. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" She shot back, crossing her arms. "What difference does it make?" I felt my nails dig into my palms. "How long?" She rolled her eyes before finally answering. "A few months." The casual way she said it, like she was talking about a new hobby she had picked up, made my blood boil. I stared at her, feeling something in me twist, something irreversible. "Who is he?" Another sigh, like I was dragging out a conversation she had no interest in having. "His name is Jason. I met him through work." I had expected the name to hit harder, but it didn't. Jason. Just some faceless name that now had the power to tear my life apart. "And what? You just decided one day that 12 years of marriage weren't enough? That sleeping with some random asshole was worth throwing it all away?" She finally looked frustrated, shaking her head. "Adam, this isn't about you. I didn't do this to hurt you." "Then why did you?" My voice was rising now, my control slipping with every second. "Explain it to me. Help me understand how the woman I married, the woman I built a life with, decided that none of it mattered anymore." She hesitated for a moment, like she was searching for the right words, but then she just shrugged. "I don't know. I needed something different." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Something different. That's it. That's the best you've got." She didn't answer. I pushed my chair back, standing up so quickly that she flinched. "You're unbelievable. Do you even feel guilty? Do you even care what you've done?" She frowned, her arms still crossed, but there was something in her eyes now, something colder. "I care, Adam. But I'm not going to stand here and beg for your forgiveness if that's what you're waiting for." I stared at her, at the woman I had loved for over a decade, and realized that I didn't even recognize her anymore. The Lisa I knew would have been crying, would have been apologizing, would have been begging me to stay. But this woman? She had already moved on. She had made her choice, and now she was just waiting for me to decide how I was going to react. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. I hope he was worth it. Her expression didn't change. "I didn't plan for this to happen." I scoffed. "Yeah? Well, neither did I." I turned away from her, walking toward the hallway, ignoring the sound of her calling my name. I needed space. I needed to get the hell out of that house before I did something I'd regret. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But now, at least, I had my answer. And she had no idea what was coming next. I left the house without grabbing anything, without knowing where I was going, without caring what time it was or what came next. I just needed to be anywhere but there, away from the sight of her standing in the kitchen like she hadn't just destroyed our marriage with a shrug and an excuse. I got in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, but I didn't start the engine right away. My mind was spinning too fast, my body rigid with an anger so deep I felt like I couldn't breathe. She didn't even try to fight for us, didn't even pretend to be sorry. It wasn't the affair itself that shattered me the most. It was the way she looked at me when she admitted it, as if my pain was just an unfortunate side effect of her choices, nothing more than an inconvenience she now had to deal with. I finally started driving, not toward a destination but just away. The streets were empty, the early morning silence pressing in on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I thought about calling someone, maybe my brother or one of my friends, but what was I supposed to say? That my wife had been screwing some guy named Jason for months and didn't even have the decency to lie about it? That I had spent over a decade loving someone who clearly didn't love me back? No, I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. If I said it, it would become real, and I wasn't sure I could handle that right now. I pulled into an empty parking lot near the river, killing the engine and leaning back in my seat. The silence in the car was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to turn on the radio. I needed to think, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do now. Divorce? Obviously. There was no coming back from this. But how? Do I just pack my things and leave? Do I throw her out of the house? Do I expose her to everyone we know, make sure she doesn't get to walk away from this without consequences? Every scenario ran through my head, each one feeling either too weak or too extreme. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't even need to look at the screen to know it was her. I let it ring, then another text came through, then another. Adam, we need to talk. Come home. Please. I stared at the messages, wondering what exactly she thought there was left to say. She had made her choice, and now she wanted to talk? About what? About how we could somehow fix this. About how she could justify throwing away everything we built together because she needed something different. I locked the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat, gripping the steering wheel again, trying to push down the rage that was crawling up my throat. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that at some point, I stopped feeling numb and started feeling something else entirely. A need for action. A need to do something, anything, that would make her feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. I picked up my phone again, but this time I didn't open her messages. Instead, I opened my email, scrolled through my contacts, and found the name I was looking for. A divorce lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best damn one I could afford. I wasn't going to let Lisa walk away from this easily. I wasn't going to let her play the victim or spin this into something it wasn't. She had made a choice, and now she was going to deal with the consequences. I typed out a short message, straight to the point. I need to start the divorce process. Call me as soon as possible. I hit send and leaned back again, exhaling slowly. That was step one. The rest? I'd figure it out. A knock on my window startled me, and I turned to see my brother, Matt, standing outside with a concerned look on his face. I hadn't even noticed another car pulling up next to mine. I rolled down the window, and he immediately frowned. Jesus, Adam, you look like hell. What's going on? I debated lying, brushing it off, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Lisa's been cheating on me. His expression hardened instantly, his jaw tightening, his hands balling into fists at his sides. That bitch. I almost laughed at how fast his mood changed, but it wasn't funny. Nothing about this was funny. I shook my head, looking away. Yeah, found out last night. Followed her. Saw it with my own eyes. Matt let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. I swear to God, Adam, if you tell me who the guy is, I'll handle it myself. Tempting. Very tempting. But I had to be smart about this. I wasn't going to give Lisa the satisfaction of thinking I had lost control. Not worth it, I muttered. I already contacted a lawyer. I don't know what to do next. He opened the car door and gestured for me to get out. Come on. You're not sitting here all day, drowning in this shit. We're getting breakfast, and we're making a plan. I hesitated, then finally got out of the car. Matt wasn't the most emotionally sensitive guy, but he had always been in my corner, always had my back when things went to hell. Right now, that was exactly what I needed. As we walked to his car, I glanced back at mine, at the phone still sitting on the passenger seat with Lisa's unread messages staring back at me. She could wait. I sat across from Matt in the corner booth of a small diner, barely touching the plate of food in front of me. The smell of eggs and bacon filled the air, but my appetite was non-existent. Matt, on the other hand, was shoveling food into his mouth like this was any other day, pausing only to take long sips of his coffee before stabbing another piece of pancake with his fork. He wasn't the kind of guy to tiptoe around things, and I knew he was waiting for me to start talking, but I wasn't sure where to begin. There were too many thoughts racing through my head, too many things I wanted to say, but none of them made sense in any logical order. All right, let's get this shit straight, Matt finally said, setting his fork down and leaning forward. You're getting a divorce, that much is obvious. But what's your next move? Are you kicking her out? Moving out yourself? What's the plan? I rubbed a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. I don't know yet. I already contacted a lawyer, so that's in motion. But as for the rest, I haven't figured it out. Matt scoffed, shaking his head. Come on, man, you need to be smarter than that. You can't just sit there and wait for shit to happen. You need to take control of this before she does. Women like Lisa? They'll flip this around and make you look like the bad guy before you even realize what's happening. I stared down at the table, knowing he was right but not wanting to admit it. I don't know if I can handle being in that house with her. Every time I look at her, I just see her with him. I can't stand it. Then don't, Matt said firmly. Take some time away, but don't make it easy for her either. If you leave for good, she'll start making moves before you even get the chance. And trust me, she's already thinking about her next step. I clenched my jaw. The idea of Lisa planning her next move while I was still trying to process everything making me sick to my stomach. He wasn't wrong. Lisa had been calm, too calm, like she had already thought this through before I even confronted her. She wasn't panicking, wasn't begging me to stay, wasn't trying to fix anything. She was just waiting. All right, I said finally. I'll stay at the house, but I'm not talking to her. I don't want to hear her excuses, don't want to hear her bullshit explanations. I just want this to be over as fast as possible. Matt smirked. Now that's more like it. And while you're at it, start gathering everything you need. Bank statements, assets, anything that could screw you over in court. She might act all indifferent now, but wait until the divorce actually starts. That's when the claws come out. I sighed, leaning back in the booth. How the hell did I end up here, Matt? 12 years, and this is where it all ends. His smirk faded, and for once, he looked serious. Because she's selfish. Because she wanted something new, something exciting, and she didn't give a shit about what it would do to you. That's the truth, and you need to accept it. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I knew he was right, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. Lisa hadn't just made a mistake. She had made a choice. And now, I had to make mine. When I finally got back to the house later that afternoon, Lisa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed. The moment I walked in, she glanced up, her expression unreadable, but she didn't say anything. I walked past her, straight to the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. Minutes later, there was a knock. Adam, can we talk? I ignored her, shoving a duffel bag under the bed and pulling out my laptop to start digging through our financial records. Another knock, this time more insistent. Adam, I know you're pissed, but we can't just ignore each other forever. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. We don't have to talk. The lawyer will handle everything. A pause. Then, so that's it. You're just shutting me out completely. I stood up, opening the door just enough to look at her, my voice low and controlled. What exactly do you expect, Lisa? You think I'm going to sit down and have a heart-to-heart with you? You think I'm going to listen to you explain how you needed something different while you were sneaking around behind my back? No. I'm done. She crossed her arms, her expression shifting to something colder. You don't have to be an asshole about it. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, I'm the asshole? That's rich, Lisa. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, I get it, you're angry, but we still have to figure things out like adults. We have a life together, a house, finances. This isn't just going to be some clean break. That's what the lawyers are for, I said simply. We'll divide what needs to be divided, and then we'll be done. Her lips pressed together, and for a moment, she almost looked like she wanted to say something else, but then she just nodded. Fine. If that's how you want to handle this, then fine. I shut the door in her face before she could say another word. I sat back down at the desk, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. There was no going back now. This was the beginning of the end. And I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. Lisa wasn't used to being ignored. That much became obvious over the next few days as she tried, in her own way, to regain some kind of control over the situation. At first, it was small things, casual attempts to start conversations, asking pointless questions she already knew the answers to, pretending that we could somehow navigate this like two rational people when she had already burned everything down. When I refused to play along, she escalated. Passive-aggressive remarks about how I was handling things, about how I was making this harder than it needed to be, about how I was shutting her out, like I was the one who had ruined our marriage. Every time she opened her mouth, I felt my patience wearing thinner, but I refused to give her what she wanted. I wouldn't fight with her. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of making me look like the irrational one. She must have realized I wasn't going to cave because one night, while I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink, she finally decided to drop the act. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and watched me in silence for a moment before speaking. You don't actually think you're going to win, do you? I looked at her, unimpressed. Win what? This divorce, she said, her voice cool. You can play the angry, scorned husband all you want, but when it comes down to it, we both know the courts aren't going to punish me for this. I took a sip of water, forcing myself to stay calm. You sound pretty confident for someone who's about to get exposed for cheating. She smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. And you sound pretty naive if you think that's going to matter. You really think a judge is going to give a shit about who slept with who? You think that's going to change anything when we start dividing assets, when we start deciding who gets what? It won't, Adam. And if you don't stop acting like a bitter asshole, it's only going to make you look worse. I set my glass down, leaning against the counter, mirroring her stance. So that's your plan? To screw me over financially? That's what you want? Lisa sighed, shaking her head like I was being difficult. I don't want to fight. But if you push me, I'll do what I have to do. And trust me, I will come out of this just fine. I studied her for a moment, taking in the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, like she had already mapped this out in her head long before I ever found out about her affair. This wasn't someone who had made a mistake and regretted it. This wasn't someone who felt guilt or remorse. This was someone who had already accepted the idea of life without me, someone who had planned for it, someone who had been mentally preparing for this divorce while I was still living under the illusion that our marriage was real. I smiled, slow and deliberate. All right, Lisa, you do what you have to do. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to figure out if I was bluffing, but I didn't give her anything else. I just walked away, leaving her standing there. She could think whatever she wanted. She could tell herself that she was in control, that she was going to come out of this untouched. She had no idea what I had planned. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Danielle who came highly recommended by Matt's friend. She was blunt, professional, and completely unfazed by the mess I had brought to her desk. After listening to everything, she tapped a pen against the side of her coffee cup and nodded. All right, here's how we're going to do this. She laid everything out in a way that made it clear she had done this 1,000 times before. Step 1. Gather as much evidence as possible, not just of Lisa's affair, but of everything, our finances, our assets, any messages, emails, or proof that could help build my case. Step 2. Stay in the house, no matter how much I wanted to leave. If I moved out, it could be used against me later. Step 3. Be smart. No emotional outbursts, no rash decisions, no giving Lisa any ammunition she could use to make me look unstable. When she was done, she leaned back in her chair, watching me carefully. You have a strong case. But she's right about one thing: courts don't punish infidelity the way they used to. If she fights, this could get ugly. Are you ready for that? I nodded without hesitation. I don't care how ugly it gets. I just want her to regret every second of this. Danielle smirked. Good. Because from what you've told me, she's underestimating you. And that's a mistake we can use to our advantage. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. I had the next steps laid out in front of me, a clear path to follow, and for the first time in days, I felt something other than anger or betrayal. I felt determined. Lisa thought she had everything under control, but she had no idea what was coming. That night, when I got home, she was sitting on the couch with her phone in hand, probably texting Jason, probably laughing at how easy she thought this was going to be. I walked past her without a word, heading straight to the bedroom to grab my laptop and start going through everything Danielle had told me to. As I pulled up our bank records, I noticed something strange: transfers. Small ones, at first, barely noticeable, but then larger amounts, all going to an account I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted as I kept scrolling, seeing just how much money had been moved over the past few months. Lisa hadn't just been planning to leave me. She had been setting herself up financially, making sure that when she finally walked away, she wouldn't be walking away empty-handed. I closed the laptop slowly, inhaling deeply before standing up and walking back into the living room. Lisa glanced up, raising an eyebrow. What? I stared at her, feeling the last traces of any emotional attachment I had left for her completely vanish. Nothing, I said, voice calm. Absolutely nothing. But in my head, I was already making my next move. Lisa had no idea that her little side account was now the center of my focus. I played it cool, acting like nothing had changed, but inside, I was already setting things in motion. Over the next few days, I collected everything: bank statements, transaction histories, screenshots of her text messages that I had quietly recovered, and even a record of all the times she had transferred money without my knowledge. Every piece of evidence, every tiny detail, I forwarded to Danielle, who responded with one sentence that made everything feel worth it. This changes everything. The shift in the house was immediate. Lisa noticed I wasn't reacting the way she expected, and it started getting to her. She had planned for a fight, for arguments, for me to be broken, angry, or irrational. But I gave her none of that. I was patient. I was silent. And that silence made her nervous. She started watching me more, asking pointless questions, throwing out little comments to gauge my reaction. But I gave her nothing. She didn't know what I knew, and that was my advantage. On the morning of our scheduled meeting with the lawyers, Lisa stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, carefully fixing her hair like she was about to walk into a job interview instead of a divorce negotiation. She caught my reflection in the mirror and smirked. "You ready for today? You know, we could still keep this civil. No need to drag it out." I finished buttoning my shirt, not even bothering to look at her. "Oh, I'm ready." She turned around, arms crossed, like she was waiting for me to break, waiting for some sign that I wasn't handling this as well as I pretended to be. "I don't know why you're making this harder than it needs to be, Adam. We're both adults. We can walk away from this without ruining each other's lives." I finally met her gaze, forcing a small smile. "That's exactly what I intend to do." The moment we stepped into the lawyer's office, the mood changed. Lisa sat down with a confident expression, probably thinking this was going to be a simple discussion where she got everything she wanted. But the second Danielle opened the folder in front of her and began laying out the financial discrepancies, the hidden transfers, and the timeline of Lisa's deception, I saw the first crack in her composure. Danielle didn't waste time. She was calm, precise, and methodical. "Mrs. Carter, I'd like to go over some concerns we have regarding financial misconduct. There have been multiple unauthorized transfers from joint accounts to a separate account that Mr. Carter was not informed of. These transactions could be considered an attempt to hide assets before divorce proceedings, which, as you know, would not reflect well in court." Lisa's face barely changed, but I saw the way she clenched her jaw slightly. "That's ridiculous. It's not misconduct. It's my money too. I was just securing some funds for myself. There's nothing illegal about that." Danielle nodded, flipping another page. "Certainly, you're entitled to your share of the assets. However, the amount transferred exceeds what would be considered reasonable personal withdrawals. Additionally, we have documentation of these transactions beginning months before Mr. Carter was even aware of marital issues, which raises concerns about premeditation." Lisa's confidence wavered just a little, but she forced a scoff. "So what? Are you saying I'm not allowed to use my own money? That's absurd." Danielle remained unfazed. "No, what I'm saying is that a judge will not look favorably upon financial deception, especially when it appears to be deliberate asset shielding before divorce. Given this evidence, we are requesting a full financial disclosure from your end, including any accounts in your name that have been receiving these transfers." Lisa's fingers tapped against the table, her posture stiffening. "You can't just accuse me of hiding assets. That's not going to hold up." Danielle leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "That depends. We can settle this now, or we can escalate it to court, where forensic accountants will go through every transaction, every deposit, every withdrawal. If that happens, and the court determines there was financial misconduct, you may not only lose access to those funds, but also be subject to penalties." For the first time, Lisa hesitated. I could see the calculations running through her head, the realization that this wasn't going the way she had planned. She had expected me to fight like a man drowning, thrashing around, making reckless decisions. But I hadn't. I had been smart. I had been patient. And now, she was the one caught off guard. Danielle continued without missing a beat. "Additionally, we have evidence of marital misconduct, including communications between you and a third party that establish a pattern of infidelity. While we acknowledge that this may not significantly impact asset division, it will be relevant in negotiations regarding the settlement, particularly in any claims for spousal support." Lisa let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, give me a break. You're really going to drag that into this? What happened between me and Jason is personal. It has nothing to do with this divorce." Danielle didn't even blink. "Actually, it does. It speaks to intent. And given that you have been planning for this separation for months, it further strengthens our case regarding financial manipulation. But if you would rather take this to court and have all of this presented in front of a judge, we are more than prepared to proceed." Lisa's expression darkened. She glanced at me then, her eyes searching for something, some kind of opening, some sign that I might be willing to back down. But I just watched her, calm and silent, letting her realize, in real time, that she had lost. For the next hour, negotiations unfolded with precision. Lisa tried to push back, but every argument she had was countered. Every move she made had already been anticipated. By the end of it, she was forced into a settlement that left her with far less than she had expected. She didn't get the financial cushion she had been quietly building. She didn't get to walk away clean, playing the role of the misunderstood victim. She didn't get to rewrite the story in her favor. When we left the office, she barely looked at me. She just walked ahead, her pace brisk, her shoulders tense. I followed at a steady pace, watching as she reached her car and hesitated, gripping the handle a little too tightly before finally turning back to face me. "You think you won?" she asked, voice sharp, ice cold. I met her gaze, letting the silence stretch for just a moment before answering. "I think I finally stopped losing." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head before opening the car door. "You'll regret this, Adam." I stepped back, watching as she got in and drove off without another word. But as her car disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. The weight on my chest, the anger in my gut, the uncertainty about what came next, it was all gone. Lisa was out of my life. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally free.